I recently transferred to a Louisiana police department. I don't wish to share the name of the city where I work, because this tale cannot get back to my boss. I'm certain she would think I wasn't all there if she heard what I saw in the Bayou while looking for a body. The new city was a bit of a culture shock, and the humid weather near did me in for the first few months. Before the Bayou case was started, I met an odd person while on my lunch break. It gave me hints of how strange this new city really was. There's a fish shack nearby the office. It was mostly outdoor table space to eat, but I normally brought my lunch back to eat at my desk. I hated sitting outside in the sun trying to enjoy a meal. While I was walking past the seating area, I noticed something that made me pause. A boy, barely a teen, was sulking around the trash can. And I mean sulking. The fish shack was pretty much a fast food place, and people would toss away their trash outside at the end of the meal. The boy watched as a couple got up and tossed a styrofoam container away with a few fries and a small piece of fried fish inside. He waited until they took a few steps away, until he quickly pulled the container out. Before he could eat the scraps, I walked over to him. "Hey, don't eat that," I told him, and he was so startled he dropped the container. I didn't mean to scare him or sound so harsh. Handing him my lunch, I bent down to pick up the garbage and threw it away again. "Here, eat mine if you're hungry. You really shouldn't eat trash. You could get sick." He looked up at me, seemed confused, as if this was the first nice thing anyone had ever done for him. I looked over him for signs of some abuse, and wondered if I could get his name, then I could look into his situation. Despite the heat, he was wearing a sweater 3 sizes too big. The deep V-neck made the shirt slip off his narrow shoulder. His hair was a sandy color and messily cut at the shoulders. Freckles spotted his nose and shoulders. He wasn't dirty, and I didn't see any bruises, so that was a good sign. Necklaces of fishing line hung from his neck, and I didn't know if he picked up some trash to wear or if this was some new fashionable trend. "Are you sure I can have this?" he asked in a small voice, looking around as if he was committing a crime. "Of course, what's your name?" "I'm Officer Anthony Turner." I flashed my badge, hoping it made him feel safe talking with me. He slowly took out a fry and ate it, debating on if he wanted to talk. "Catfish," he said finally. The one word confused me. I did order fried catfish with a side of fries, but it took me a few seconds to clue in he didn't mean my lunch. "Is that your legal name?" I said, and he nodded. I've heard worse names since I'd arrived in the city. Maybe his father was really into fishing. Was his sibling named Crocodile or something? Smiling at my own joke, I gestured for him to sit down at the wooden table to talk with me for a while. Catfish didn't look as if he was starving, but he must have had a good reason for trying to eat from the trash. "So, Catfish, what's up with trying to get table scraps? I don't mean to pry into your private life, but seeing something like that makes me a bit worried." He listened as he slowly started to eat, then stuffed his face full of fries to the point he nearly choked. I gladly handed over my can of iced tea. It appeared that whoever raised this kid dropped the ball somewhere. "Wanted to try some new food here for ages. It smells great, but I don't have any money. Oh, wait. I found a few coins here and there. They're not on me, so I don't know how much they're worth. I guess I just got desperate," he explained after drinking nearly the whole can of iced tea in one gulp. "Thank you for giving me this. It's a nice treat, and I'll pay you back one way or another." He gave me a wide smile that looked a bit too long for his face. Normally, large mouths look unsettling, but this made him similar to a happy frog. Catfish was a good kid, at least. It made me worry that someone may take advantage of him, and I was glad I was the one who spotted him first. I gave him a wave at the offer to pay me back for lunch. It's fine, I don't mind buying you a meal, but can I ask, you doing alright? Are you eating enough at home? It's a Tuesday, isn't it? Shouldn't you be in school? I sounded like a worried parent. These questions would be enough to scare anyone off, but he listened while eating a bit more carefully this time. The first bite of fried catfish made him so happy he tapped his feet on the ground, causing his flip-flops to make a slapping sound for a few seconds. After he could focus, he went in to answer my questions. I'm eating just fine. I can catch enough in the bayou to stay well fed most days. I was taking care of someone who couldn't be alone, so I couldn't go to school. I don't have any plans of moving, so I don't really need schooling. The bayou provides me with everything I need aside from the rare treat like this meal. He was smiling again, but I crossed my arms thinking it over. He appeared happy, and I should drop the whole thing. I felt as if he was a bit too young to be on his own. I've heard about people living in the bayou before, but I always assumed they were hermit types. As long as he was healthy, it was none of my business, no matter how I felt about it. Do you have a cell phone or computer at home? I asked, and he shook his head. How about you meet me here every Tuesday? I'll buy you lunch. His face lit up. Quickly, he forced down his excitement, shaking his head, feeling guilty accepting such an offer. It's a kind offer, but it's hard for me to accept things for free, he admitted. You can catch things in the bayou, right? My partner makes killer crawdads, but never have time to catch fresh ones. How about you bring a few over, we can do a trade. I wasn't even finished speaking when a hand shot out for us to seal the deal. I let her laugh and shook a small hand. Catfish now didn't hide how happy he was to try different things on the menu without needing to dig around in the trash can. My lunch was about up, and I should have been back at the office after a few minutes. I double-checked to make sure Catfish was really doing all right, and we made a promise to meet next week. I wanted to get his last name, but didn't push for it. Next time we spoke, I would ask. When Tuesday rolled around, I met him at the fish shack as promised. I ordered whatever he wanted to try. This time it was a fish burger with extra everything on top. I may have been spoiling him a little. The only problem came when he upheld his end of the bargain and brought a tub of live crawdads. The tub was sealed with air holes on the lid. I heard them angrily scuttling around, and I didn't expect them to be alive and out for revenge. I didn't have a plan of how to deal with them at the office, but didn't bring it up to Catfish as he happily ate his lunch. We parted ways, and I took the tub back to the office. My partner very confused why I gave him a bunch of live crawdads in the middle of the workday. He lived close by, so he could swim by his place to hand them over to his wife to deal with. I didn't have the heart to tell him more would be coming every Tuesday. For a few weeks, I spent meeting up with a boy I barely knew anything about. He refused to give me a last name, saying he'd forgotten it. I didn't pressure him into telling me anything he didn't want to. The only facts I knew about him was he lived off the land. His parents were long gone, and he was very skilled at catching crawdads, much to my partner's dismay. Our Tuesdays would have continued on like that if a big case didn't break. A girl went missing. Then her body was found in the bayou 2 days later. Then another poor girl. And then another, but her body wasn't recovered. Because of the case, I was too busy to meet Catfish for lunch. He fully understood and told me he was rooting for me to find the killer. I wasn't a detective and only had a very small part of the case, but still wanted to do my best to help. I only chased down leads the detectives didn't have time for, or took over different office tasks to free up other manpower. The constant overtime lasted for 3 months, until a huge break happened. A suspect was identified. From From what I heard, he tried taking a girl on her way home from school. What he didn't know was she took mixed martial arts since she was a child. A high school student took him by surprise and kicked the shit out of him. No other way to put it. Sadly, he got back into his car and drove off, but left behind enough blood to get a name from previous assault charges. This man was careful enough not to leave any DNA behind on the bodies, and messed up by picking the wrong victim. We didn't know for certain it was the same guy, but felt the odds were pretty good. It was. Unfortunately, the suspect was not at home when a few officers did a house call. A boat was registered in his name. His car parked at the docks with fresh blood left behind, but his boat was nowhere to be seen. From witness statements, he'd gone to the Bayou, and yet to come back to the dock. So we had an idea of who killed those girls and went in the Bayou. Only 2 bodies were recovered, and each were found in popular catfishing areas. We had a murderer, and 1 more body to find. I volunteered to be a part of the search party, even though I had never been in the Bayou before, and, well, never been a part of a search party either. I was paired up with someone who did have experience in both. The department only cared about having manpower out looking. I didn't care if I didn't know what I was doing. Before going out with the search party, I listened to some advice and bought some high rubber boots. They turned out not to be tall enough, but at least they kept my feet somewhat dry. Going out into the swamp chasing down a killer was nerve-wracking. I listened to the briefing very carefully as everyone was paired off and we double-checked our equipment. My new partner was impressed I brought along some spare batteries for the radio, but shook his head when I'd forgotten the bug spray. We shared some after introducing ourselves to each other. "I'm Trevor Kelsey. Just stay close, watch out for gators," he said, and wasn't joking about the gators. I was extra nervous from those words. I took my time, shaking his hand, putting off going to the swamp. I finally released Kelsey's hand so I could follow him to the boat that would take us to the search area. The bug spray didn't do much. My arms itched and my clothing was damp from humidity. The search was already miserable, and we barely even got started. Keeping all my complaints silent, we walked along in the swamp, my feet sinking every step. Our team was looking for the last missing girl. It would be nice if we could find and catch the culprit, but everyone thought he was long gone or hiding somewhere nicer than this swamp. Since the other bodies were found in fishing areas, the rest needed to be checked over. Some places could only be reached by boat, but sometimes you could walk part of the way depending on the water level. I scratched my arms, convinced bugs were biting away at me. Sweat dripped from my nose as Kelsey kept his pace slow, so his novice partner could keep up. "Sorry, I'm slow." I apologized after we needed to stop because my foot was stuck. It took me a minute to get it free to carry on. Kelsey shook his head, not looking upset for having me along. "Everyone has a first time doing something. We had odd numbers, so unless you came along, I would be either alone or sit this one out. At least you're willing to slog through all this. I've been with guys who had 10 years of searching the Bayou under the belt, and they bitch about every trip." I let out a short laugh, feeling better, that I wasn't the worst partner he'd been stuck with. As we walked, I kept my eyes and ears focused, trying to see any sign of human life. The Bayou was almost like an alien planet for someone like myself. The air was heavier than I've felt before. Chirping sounds off in the distance rattled my nerves, and every ripple of the water made me tense up, expecting a gator to come at us at any second. I didn't understand how anyone could live here. Did Catfish really stay in the Bayou, or was his place a small shack just on the edge of it? This place was beautiful and yet felt dangerous. Kelsey noticed how nervous I was and started up a conversation. "Scared something's gonna jump out and get you?" he said in a joking tone. "Actually, yeah," I admitted with no shame. He laughed at me, shaking his head. "If a small kid like my lunch friend could live out here, it couldn't be all that dangerous, right?" I really wanted that to be the case. My foot got stuck yet again. I heard a sound off in the distance before Kelsey started speaking. My head turned away from him, and I half listened, trying to find the source of the other noise. "Don't worry about it. The key is to say... I was looking off into the swamp through the mossy trees when Kelsey suddenly stopped talking. When I turned to ask him what was wrong, I felt my heart nearly stop. The man that was a few steps away a second ago was gone. Not even any ripples on the water remained. That didn't make any sense. He was right here in front of me, and he didn't have any time to walk away. There weren't any trees wide enough to hide behind. Wanting to believe this was a prank on the new guy, I stayed in the same spot, scanning the trees. Kelsey, this isn't funny. Can you come out so we can do our job? I shouted off into the bayou, trying to keep my voice even. Only the sounds of the swamp answered back. I felt sweat clinging to my back, but this time not from the heat. I called his name out again, trying not to freak out. A mixture of fear and a simmering rage spilled into my stomach. Grabbing my radio, I started calling in the fact I lost my partner. Kelsey may get an earful about this dumb prank, but he deserved it. The radio crackled and then died. Finally replacing the batteries gave the same result. Pulling out my phone, I felt my hand start to tremble when it didn't even turn on. I charged it right before we left. It should be at 90%, and yet it was dead. Suddenly I felt like the final person in a horror movie. Shaking my head in an attempt to collect myself, I thought of what to do next. A blur of motion in the distance caught my eyes. Something dark moved between the trees, and looked human. Hey, Kelsey? I called out, full well knowing it couldn't be him. It was a bad idea, but I started after the figure that was now hidden behind the twisted trees. I only got a few steps when I heard a splash behind, and I turned to see another figure dart behind a different tree. I almost missed it. This wasn't good. Whoever was messing with me, there was more than one of them. My hand went to my holster at the side. I've drawn my weapon a handful of times and only shot at a person once before. Whatever was happening, I did not like it in the slightest. I'm with the police. We're on official business here looking for a body, so please do not get in the way of an investigation. I called out, unsure of what else to say. A chattering sound came, and it almost sounded like laughter. I was not going to take the friendly approach any longer. Weapon drawn, I scanned the trees, looking for more of those dark figures, as that horrible sound echoed around. Air caught in my lungs when the sound stopped, and I saw the cause. A massive shadow started to swim through the water in my direction. I scrambled, trying to find solid ground, which was rare in that swamp. The water was only ankle deep in spots. Something large enough to cast a shadow should be too big to swim in such shallow water. Taking my eyes off the dark shape, I looked up, trying to see if what I was seeing was a shadow of a plane or a really weird cloud. Nothing but the treetops and a clear blue sky. A splashing sound jerked my attention back down. Convinced an alligator finally decided I was a tasty snack. Weapon raised, I almost fired. What I saw made me lower my handgun, and all the tension faded from my shoulders. I was surprised, but didn't think of him as a threat. Catfish? What the hell are you doing out here? I demanded in a stressed voice. The boy I had become friends with was coming out of the swamp, water dripping from his loose clothing. How did he sneak up on me, and why did it look like he was coming out of a much deeper part of the water when it was so shallow? You really shouldn't be on this side. What are you doing here? He said, tossing my question back at me. My job. I know you live in the bayou, but... No, never mind. Have you seen my partner? He was just here. Looking around, I almost expected to see Kelsey again, or at least those figures off in the distance. I was so strung out I didn't even register what Catfish first said. He was twisting the edge of his sweater, trying to get some of it dry. A friendly face was nice, even if I didn't know what was going on. Nah, I haven't seen any humans beside yourself lately. I heard your voice and came over really not expecting to see you here. I guess you're after that other man that came through a little while ago dropping a dead girl off. Not sure where the girl is, though. Staring at the boy, my mouth nearly dropped open. Catfish might know where the suspect was. He was a dangerous man, really hoped he didn't see the boy and was coming after the only witness. What did he mean by the only human? I knew kids his age could be a bit weird thinking they're vampires and such, but Catfish didn't seem like the type. Some weird stuff has been going on. Please don't add to it. Now, did the other man see you? Do you think we're safe? He didn't see me. He's dead. The others living in the Bayou got him. I suppose it's your job to get proof of this death. Let's do that and I'll guide you out of here. I do owe you after all. So much for not adding to the weirdness. Catfish was far too calm telling me about a man's death, and the fact startled me more than anything else he hinted at. The boy started to walk easily through the swamp, leaving me to helplessly follow slowly after him. What do you mean by the others? Who killed him? No matter how hard I tried, I was unable to catch up with the boy. He walked as if the swamp was normal ground. I kept getting stuck and the heat wasn't helping. Catfish didn't look as if he wanted to answer my very important question. With a shrug, he nodded his head off towards the trees. You might have seen glimpses of them, you know. Others. I don't talk to them much, so I don't know what they are, he said with another shrug. What the hell was going on? I was out here trying to find a missing girl to bring some sort of closure to her family so they could bury her. Now I was falling behind a boy I thought I knew, and he was implying there were things beside bugs and gators in this place. All of this was a prank. For my own sanity, it needed to be one. Catfish, you've been talking about weird stuff since I saw you. What are you getting at? What did I stumble into? He stopped walking to look back over his shoulder. Our eyes met, and I noticed how dark and deep they appeared. For a moment, those eyes were not one of a child, but of something much older. When he turned, a smile was on his face, and the expression made him look like a happy little frog. It made me relax. Whatever was going on, someone was on my side. Let's just get proof of that man's body for now. After you're in a safe spot, I'll explain things a little more. That was acceptable. If he did start explaining what was going on, I doubted I would understand, or even want to hear it. That moment I just wanted to focus on doing my job. The weird stuff could wait. At least, I wanted the weird stuff to wait. As I struggled through the water and over spongy ground, the sky began to grow darker, and that made us both nervous. It should be only noon, and there was no rain in the forecast. The bayou was bad enough. Walking through it in the rain would be a nightmare. It felt like an hour of trudging along and sweating until Catfish finally stopped. He pointed a few feet in front to a bundle of clothing. At first I didn't notice those rags still had a human inside. The smell was awful. Pulling my shirt over my nose, I walked toward it. Catfish staying behind. He shouldn't see a terrible sight like this. Normally insects would make a meal out of a body out in the open like this, but none had touched the corpse. The body was facing down, meaning I needed to flip it over and try to confirm the man's identity. I didn't want to contaminate the scene any more than I already did. Pulling out my phone, I checked, begging it to turn on so I could take photos and document the position of the body. A miracle happened and it flickered to life. Wasting no time, I tried calling my boss. Then 911, but nothing went through. At least I could take the photos I wanted. When I thought I had got enough photos, I finally forced myself to grab a stick to roll the body over. My stomach tightened and I nearly lost my lunch as the corpse bobbed in the shallow water. He wasn't dead for very long, I could tell that much. Right away I knew this was our suspect, but was unable to snap a photo of his face right off the bat. I lost my lunch when my eyes landed on his torn open and empty torso. A wild animal got into him first. The water washing away most of the blood, leaving the corpse's flesh pale. In training I'd seen bodies, but never been the first one to discover one. As I was recovering, a sound came from my hip that nearly made me jump out of my skin. My radio crackled to life. It was only static, but it gave me some hope of getting someone over here to help. Because I was so focused on the radio, I wasn't paying attention to Catfish suddenly moving closer. Come in, this is... Only a few words left my lips as the soggy ground from under my feet was gone. My body sank like a brick in deep, murky water. The foul-tasting water entered my mouth before I could hold my breath. Sinking down, the water became colder, and I nearly screamed when someone touched my ankle. It was a hand, and at first I assumed it was someone trying to help, until more hands came clawing through the cold darkness, grabbing any part they could. I wanted to scream. If I did, I would die. My lung wouldn't hold for very long. A short while ago, I was with Kelsey, and my only worries was an alligator and a serial killer. Now the Bayou reached out to take my life, and there was nothing I could do about it. My arms were pinned from the countless hands. I couldn't even try to struggle to the surface or grab my handgun as a blunt object to attack the cold hands. Regrets flashed through my mind, lungs about to burst. My brain went through everything it knew, trying to find a way out of this impossible situation. Just as my time ran out, the hands let go to scatter back into the dark. Someone else took hold to save a scared novice officer from nearly dying. Coughing and sputtering out the grimy water, the ordeal left it impossible to see my savior for a few minutes. Yes, I was thankful to be alive, but confused over what the hell just happened. "Turner, are you alright? What the hell, man?" Kelsey's voice cut through the panic, nearly dying. He dragged me to better ground as I coughed up the rest of the water I nearly swallowed. Rubbing my eyes clear, I looked over the scene. He stood looking as panicked as I felt. My gear ruined, but he was already on a working radio calling for backup. "What?" I started, voice too hoarse to speak. "We were just walking along. You got pulled under. Did a gator... Christ on a stick, when did that body get there?" Kelsey's attention was directed toward the dead man, floating near where he'd saved me. Neither of us spoke until the other teams arrived, thinking it was an alligator attack and not a body retrieval. The entire discovery was impossible to explain, so we both just went with whatever questions that were asked, giving the only answers we could. My boot was missing and pants torn, so it was assumed an alligator did grab me and pull me under. The vague answers sounded as if I was in shock over nearly losing my leg and my life. The killer was found, and his last victim was also recovered by a different, more experienced search team. After his body was found, enough evidence came to light proving he was the killer, and the case was closed. His official cause of death was an animal attack. The resolution felt a little better. However, that man was no longer able to harm another person. Waiting to the next Tuesday was agony. At first I thought the strange events and meeting Catfish in the Bayou was a false memory from nearly drowning. But it felt too damn real to dismiss until I saw Catfish again to ask him some questions. He was late and I didn't think he was going to show. For a while I worried his entire existence was false. Sitting in the hot sun, sipping on an iced tea, I waited until my lunch break was nearly up. And finally Catfish sat on the other side of the table, a kind smile on his face. "I guess you have some questions," he started. "A few. I don't really know where to start. I guess... Are you human?" "Nope." The reply came with no hesitation. "I'm just a catfish." Now that I was looking at him more, he did have fish traits. I was kicking myself mentally for not noticing before. His oversized sweater sleeves looking like fins, his messy hair poking out on both sides of his head almost like whiskers, and his freckles the same kind of spots a catfish may have. His smile now looked more like a fish than a frog the more I looked. He even wore an fishing line and lures. How obvious could he be? "Just a catfish," I repeated, looking the boy over. "Normally, humans can't see me. You have really good sight, and because you're interacting with me in my human form, others can see me as well. But the issue is, your sight was too good. You accidentally got on the other side of the bayou where I live and where those other things hunt. If I didn't drag you back to your side, you would have been taken by the same ones that killed that man. I'm not the type to really stick my nose in business like that, but you brought me food and I did owe you. Sitting back, his answers played through my mind. It explained why Catfish didn't bring any crawdads this time. We were even. Hell, I owed him now. In a way, Catfish only gave a vague description of what happened and what he was. It was good enough for me. I didn't want to know about the supernatural things happening deep in the swamp. But if I stayed at the department, I may need to go back into the Bayou again. Moving and finding a new job sounded like such a hassle when there was a better option. If I buy you lunches, would you be able to keep me from going into your side of the bayou if I need to search it again for work? I asked, hopeful. Catfish made a show of humming over the idea. When the smells of the fish shack drifted over on the wind, he broke down, unable to keep up with the act. With a sheepish smile, he gave a small nod. If you make it Tuesdays and Fridays, I can make sure you don't slip up again. Reaching out my hand, we shook on it. My wallet may take a hit, but it was better than uprooting my life or dying in the swamp. Plus, Catfish was a nice kid. In the very least, he deserved a good meal twice a week. I was still adjusting to a move across the country and a new job. In the past few months, I made a habit of buying lunch for a boy named Catfish. Before I met him, I didn't believe in supernatural things, but after a trip in the Bayou, I was forced to see there were some things beyond natural in the world. Somehow that fact didn't shake my view on life. I carried on like normal. As long as I stayed away from those supernatural threats, I would be safe. At least that's what I assumed. 2 days a week, I spent my lunch break with Catfish, who was, well, a catfish. He appeared human, but I knew he was something else. Maybe not just a fish, but something much more dangerous. Because I bought him food, we became friends. He promised to protect me if I did slip up and come across something unnatural threatening my life. He was such a powerful thing in a small body, I never needed to worry about losing a fight. Again, that's what I thought. On my lunch break, I was at our usual spot. Catfish hadn't shown up yet, and I was worried about it. He never missed out on getting free food. The only time we didn't meet is if my job got in the way. As the minutes passed, I grew more anxious about him. He didn't own a cell phone. There was no way to contact him to see if he was alright. Just as it felt as if my nerves were going to get the better of me, a man stopped beside my table. At a glance, it was obvious he knew Catfish, and he knew he wasn't human. His hair was long and unkempt. Eyes so light it looked as if they didn't have any color to them, stared me down. He was wrapped in a blanket. Torn and dirty and bare feet stuck out from under the sheet. He gave me a cold stare, face somewhat hidden behind his hair. Oddly enough, I felt as if I had seen him before, but could not place his face.
Catfish is in trouble. You need to save him. Follow me.
Giving me no time to respond, he turned and started away. My stomach sank. Images of that kind boy flashed through my mind as I got up stumbling to my feet in a rush to follow this man. I called into work saying a family emergency came up, and I needed the rest of the day off. Since I've yet to miss a day, my boss let me call in on short notice. I kept asking the stranger questions about Catfish and what was going on, but he didn't respond. Instead, he paused, looked me over with a face that could freeze fire.
Do you own a car?
I nodded, and this time he followed me. It was only a short walk back to the office, and yet each second passed impossibly slowly. When we got to my car, he sat in the passenger seat again, not speaking much. Other than giving me direction, he refused to answer my important questions. We drove to a small dock with a rowboat at the end. He stood in the front of the boat facing away, keeping perfect balance as I swayed the small craft getting in. The moment both my feet were on the wood, the boat started to glide down the water on its own. After what happened the last time in the bayou, I wasn't keen on entering it again. My stomach twisted in stress and fear. I wished the boat would go faster, so I could find my small friend and hopefully get him out of trouble. I didn't understand what I could even do. I was human and felt helpless against any supernatural threat. The boat steered through narrow waterways. The bayou around us, an amazing piece of nature full of creatures and life I would never fully understand. It was still early in the afternoon, and yet the light surrounding us looked golden as if the sun was setting. I spotted Catfish before the boat reached him. It needed to steer around some wet but solid ground. The boy was on his back, covered by a dirty blanket on a soggy bank. I didn't wait for the boat. I jumped out, rushing towards him, finding it hard to move in damp ground. My shoes soaked and pants wet up to the knees. I pressed on, frantic. When I did reach him, I collapsed next to the sleeping boy, thinking the worst. Cat, what happened to him? I demanded of the man who stopped beside us. Catfish was pale, his breathing weak and ragged. The blanket covering the frail boy stained what I feared to be blood. The man looked almost emotionless, not affected by my outburst.
He was attacked by a creature. They tore out an organ, for who knows what reason. He's tough, but can't hold on for more than a day or so,
the man said in a low voice. He sounded angry, but it was easy to see he was upset at himself for not protecting Catfish. Lifting the boy up onto my lap, I shuddered at how cold he felt. Placed a hand on his damp forehead, feeling as if he was about to burst. The reasons I moved across the country came flooding back, seeing him like this. I forced them all down to focus on what I needed to do. I need to get him to the hospital. The man shook his head. If it was that simple, he would have done it already. For some reason, he brought me here, and that was a hopeful sign. I'd do anything I could to save this child.
There is a creature that lives deep in the bayou. She can make something to heal him. However, she does not do exchanges with other supernatural things. I can bring you to her,
he explained. Put him in the boat. We'll go right now. The man shook his head at what I said. I heard a noise from Catfish, and I kept brushing his hair out of his face, trying to soothe him.
No, he must stay here. The place we're going is dangerous. You might not even make it. I cannot watch over him and you at the same time.
I hated leaving Catfish behind while he was suffering. I understood why we needed to do so, and I didn't have anyone I could call to watch the boy for me. If I called my partner, he would rush Catfish off to a hospital right away. Don't. A small voice came from the boy in my arms. I was glad he was strong enough to speak, but hearing his voice broke my heart. I wanted to kill whatever did this to him. Instead of looking as if he was in pain, the boy smiled up at me. It was his usual wide smile, and that made my chest tighten.
Turner, it's fine. Don't risk your life for me.
No, it's not fine. There's no way we're leaving you to die like this. He looked up with a strained expression. He knew I wasn't going to back down, and the last thing he wanted was a friend to get hurt for his sake. The thought of someone dying for him may hurt him more than having an organ ripped out.
I'll protect him. I'm strong enough for that now. I do not need to rely on your strength, so this man shall die on your behalf.
The man stood confident in our mission. Catfish did not appear to share the same thoughts. He closed his eyes and let her sigh, knowing he couldn't stop us.
Please, just come back alive, no matter what.
I promised him we would. Speaking drained Catfish of strength, and he fell asleep again. I gave him a few moments to rest before lifting him up, placed the boy under a tree, hoping it was a better spot, instead of his legs being in the water. The man silently watched as I promised Catfish again I would save him, and placed a kiss on the top of his head. I was facing an entire bayou of supernatural creatures, far beyond my power and understanding. I barely knew anything about this area because I had recently moved from a colder part of the country. The trip would truly be venturing out into the unknown. I turned to face the mystery man, ready to press forwards, not wanting to waste my time anymore. He gave me a nod and led me back to the boat. I could do nothing but sit as we started to go further and deeper into the bayou and into a swamp. As we drifted along, it got darker and darker. The man took a thick stick from the bottom of the boat and wrapped some fabric around the end to make a torch. After he lit it, he stood at the front of the boat, again the fire lighting our way. Due to the darkness, it was impossible to see past the firelight. I heard things chattering off in the dark and splashes of water around us. My handgun at my hip, I felt jumpy, ready to draw it. A gun might not be much against the monsters in this place, but it was better than nothing. Finally, the boat hit land, and we got off onto damp ground. My feet sank every step. Hyper aware of everything around me, I followed the stranger, being guided by the faint light. The man hadn't introduced himself, and the feeling of seeing him before never faded. It was either solving that mystery or letting the fear of the dark take over. "Have we met before?" I asked him in a low voice.
No.
He didn't even take his attention off the path. I knew his face, but not his voice. A twig snapped, and I couldn't see what caused it. Because my guide didn't appear worried, I didn't stop walking. My palms felt sweaty from stress. I just wanted us to hurry and save Catfish, but we remained at a slow walking speed.
You have a gun, correct? Do not use it unless needed. It will not kill anything here. Just piss them off,
he warned, then gave me a quick glance over his shoulder.
Do you work at the police station we took your car from?
That was a bit of an off-topic question. I nodded. He didn't elaborate on why he asked. Suddenly I remembered why I knew this man, when I thought of his face and the station. Every day I walked by his photo on the way to my desk, along with photos of other fallen officers from that station. "You're Troy Gavin. What on earth are you doing out in the swamp?" I blurted out. His face stopped for a moment at the words before carrying on. At some point, this man was human and worked as a detective 2 years before I got the job. I had heard some about his past, and it was slowly coming back in bits and pieces. He disappeared and was assumed dead, but there was a reason for that I was forgetting.
It's a long story,
he started. "I have nothing else to do. I don't mean to pry if you don't want to tell me, though," I commented with a shrug. Another glance as he decided to answer my questions. It was a sign we were in a safer part of the bayou if he was fine speaking so casually.
I worked as a detective, in the same station you're at. Some little girls were being kidnapped and murdered. I was able to track down the murderer, but the problem was it was a priest. A combination of a good lawyer and his flock giving him a false alibi got him off for the murders.
We walked, and Gavin's voice was low in the oppressive darkness around us. The torch flickered, and I started to feel a terrible pit of ice forming in my stomach. Details of the case I heard about came back to my memory, and I regretted asking Gavin about it. I knew what that priest did when he got free. Gavin continued on regardless.
When he got out, he raped and killed my 10-year-old sister.
I felt cold and needed to stop walking. Gavin also stopped, half turned in my direction, his face with a hard expression. I never should have asked. I shook my head, trying to clear it. "I'm so sorry. I bet that lawyer and the people who vouched for him couldn't forgive themselves for helping a monster like that." For a moment, Gavin looked amused in the firelight. Something reflected off his finger, and it's the first time I noticed a wedding band. He gave up married, normal human life and turned into something else. I knew the priest was dead, but didn't hear the details of how that happened. New cops normally didn't get the lowdown on all the older cases until they were really interesting or relevant.
The lawyer quit. The ones who gave the false alibis had their lives ruined in some way or another. I could arrest the priest for my sister's murder, but I wanted everyone to suffer. I wanted that lawyer to lose everything. I wanted to torment him in the most painful way possible. In the end, I did so. I found the 3 words to say that would utterly ruin him.
Swallowing the lump that formed in my throat, I didn't want the answer I asked for. A girl died, but that man was just doing his job. If he quit after, he might not have known the priest was guilty and just did what he's hired for. I didn't know how I felt about Gavin taking revenge on the man. What did you say to him? I asked in a strained voice.
I love you.
My heart skipped a beat and my eyes went back to the wedding band. This man did the cruelest thing he could think of by marrying the lawyer who felt responsible for his little sister's murder. Instead of harassing him or physically assaulting the other man, he drove in emotional pain every time he looked at his new husband. I couldn't imagine being so heartless to do such a thing. When I didn't respond, Gavin turned to carry on.
I belong here. I was already a monster before Catfish showed me how to turn into one.
His voice was low as we started walking again. I thought I heard some soft sounds under his voice, but replied before I started to try and find the source. Did you come here because you feel guilty for what you did? I asked, unable to keep the question unspoken. Suddenly, sound erupted from behind. It was something that did not belong in the Bayou. It was so foreign and unnerving I couldn't help myself from turning around, trying to find out what was making it. It was clapping. Not scattered clapping, but rhythmic clapping, as if hundreds of people were clapping all at once. And in a beat only they knew.
Don't look at them,
Gavin warned, and it was too late. When I looked, the darkness came away all at once. The bayou looked like it was at dusk, just enough light to see by. My eyes adjusted as I saw countless figures crowding between the mossy trees. They clapped but stopped the second my eyes landed on them. All stood frozen in time, hands raised to a prayer. Each and every one of these people were dead. Glossy, blank eyes stared as the smell hit. Rotted flesh peeled away from bones as clothing hung off their thin frames. My mouth opened to scream, but no noise came out as all at once they rushed forward. A hand wrapped around my eyes and Gavin grabbed me by my shoulder from behind to draw me close. I felt the air rush past as those figures ran by, and the clapping started up again. I screamed then, but the noise being drowned out by the clapping sound. As suddenly as it happened, it stopped. Gavin lowered his hands and went back to the still lit torch he dropped. I was still trembling, breathing hard, not understanding what I just saw. The light faded back to a darkness that made it impossible to see if there was more of the dead looking at us. What? I croaked out, unable to walk. Gavin took my arm and dragged my shaking body forwards until I could take some steps on my own. He wasn't afraid in the slightest. That fact made dread spread through my entire body. I had just witnessed the most frightening thing in my life, and didn't even faze him.
That was just a tide. Don't worry about it. Unless you pay attention to them, you won't get swept up in it, he explained.
That? A tide? This place? Can I ever understand anything about it? I asked. He paused and shook his head. He could tell me everything about this side of the bayou where he and Catfish lived, but I was human. I would never understand what creatures roamed and the reasons for their existence. If I was lucky, that army of the dead would be the only thing we came across. I wasn't. Keeping a hand on my sidearm at all times, we pushed on. I didn't even dare slap the bugs away, trying to make a meal out of me. The further we went, the more the darkness fought against the torchlight. I needed to stay on Gavin's heels to stay inside the light. He was also looking tense. Beads of sweat ran down his face, the man looking ready to attack at any moment. Squinting, I thought I saw something beyond our light. A small dot of color. We slowly got closer, and the color grew larger. It appeared to be a flickering light. A candle, maybe. Hope filled my chest for a second. "Is that?" I asked in a whisper. Something in the darkness reacted to my voice. A large claw came down on Gavin, causing him to cry out in pain. It tore away his clothing and took parts of his chest with it. The torch was dropped, and somehow he managed to push me back and out of danger. I watched horrified on the ground from being shoved so hard I fell over on my own feet. Gavin clutched at his bleeding chest and growled at whatever attacked a second before.
"The hut is a bit behind us. Run towards the light,"
he shouted over his shoulder. The claw came back into our light, and he jumped back, causing his wounds to spill blood over the ground. I stood on trembling legs, wanting to help. My gun was out without even being where I drew it. "I can't leave you," I said sternly.
"Don't be stupid. Just run, I'll be fine."
His words were nearly cut off by the claw coming back. This time he grabbed a hold of it on by the wrist, his fingers digging into the black scaled flesh. He did not, in fact, look fine. Even so, I needed to trust him. I couldn't do anything else. I ran, leaving him behind with the torch. When I was a few feet away, I realized that was what he was waiting for. He could not fight back unless I was out of the way. A roar, along with the sounds of creatures being torn from the earth, made me look at where Gavin once stood. From his form burst forth a massive creature. The man was not human, but I never imagined what he truly was. Flames burst from the small torch to surround his true body, swirling dangerously. I felt the heat from where I stood. A giant tail came crashing through and knocked thin trees aside. In the middle of those glowing flames stood an albino alligator. He tore through the darkness, large whips of his tail nearly missing me as I fled. The creature could easily tear apart the bayou if it wished. I ran away from the scene, towards the flickering light in the darkness. Tripping along, I didn't slow down. The battle I left echoed through the dark. No matter how much I pushed, it felt like that small flicker of a candle wasn't getting any closer. A hand darted from the inky dark, grabbing a hold of my arm. I shook it off to keep running, and when I nearly drowned, countless hands tried to take me into the water. Now they were trying to pull me into the never-ending darkness. They tore at my clothing, ripped, and doing their best to keep me still. I wasn't going to give up. I refused. Catfish was going to die unless I kept running. He couldn't save me this time, and Gavin was busy with bigger threats. More and more of those hands grabbed as I pulled my body away. It felt like I was walking through molasses, and yet the candlelight didn't get any closer. The moment my body nearly gave up on its own, I slammed into something. Fumbling in the dark, my hands ran along the wall I was against, to find it wasn't a wall but a door. Finding the handle, I put everything I had left to push open the door and fell into a small hut. I collapsed to the wooden floor, unable to stay awake any longer. I woke up not knowing where I was or how long I'd been out for. Sitting up, my head felt heavy and body throbbed in pain. I was in a small hut, candles burning for light, and a fireplace on the far side of the room burning away. Instead of a spooky witch's hut I'd expected, the place was decorated in lace and soft pastel colors. Plush armchairs and couches, looking like they were from the 60s, sat. Tea sets lined the shelving. I slowly stood, not knowing if I arrived in the right place.
Oh, human. What brings you here?
A raspy voice made me jump. I grabbed for my weapon, to find it missing. Those hands from before must have grabbed it. The voice belonged to a creature standing by the fire. I was certain it hadn't been there before. It was a bit taller than myself. A cloak kept most of its face and form hidden, but the long snout poking out from under its fabric made it clear what the creature was. Clawed hands picked up a fire poker to move the embers around as I collected myself. I was staring at an upright alligator. A long tail came from under the heavy cloak, leaving drag marks on the dusty floor. Catfish is hurt. I came here for some help. Miss... No one had told me this creature's name. All I knew was that it was female. After poking the fire some more, she replaced the poker. And finally she turned, her half-hidden face in my direction.
Names hold power. You shall not learn mine. I may not be able to help you. Are you aware there shall be a price for my assistance?
Her voice was low and hard to hear, as if she didn't speak often. Anything to save him. Please, I can't let Cat die. It wasn't wise to show how desperate I was, but after everything, I couldn't hold it back. A soft sound, almost like a laugh, came from her as she walked over to a table, holding countless teacups.
Things. I do not desire things. They're boring.
With those words, she dropped the teacup, letting it shatter on the floor.
Words. They are not. They hold power. They can amuse me. My price to save Catfish is simple. Answer my question. Why do you wish to save him?
As she spoke, she walked over until her snout almost touched my face. I felt myself start to sweat from stress. What did she mean? Why did anyone need a reason to want to save someone? Just something people did without thinking. There had to be some sort of trap in this simple question. He's a good kid. Of course I would want to save him. I answered, but it didn't please her.
A kid? That creature is almost as old as the Bayou itself. But I suppose he never truly matured. But that is not your true answer. I ask you again. Why do you wish to save him?
Things I wanted to forget started to creep in. The reasons for moving and leaving everything behind. The reasons why I changed my entire life and went somewhere I knew nothing about. This creature knew it was related to why I kept buying lunch for Catfish, and why we still spent time with each other. I shook my head, trying to banish the thoughts. There isn't a reason, I lied. She gave out a hiss. Backing away, I felt words catching my throat. I knew she was about to toss me out. Unless I said the truth, Catfish wouldn't be saved. and yet admitting my shame was harder than fighting through the bayou. I just wanted to forget everything. It was my past that could save someone I cared about. I stood trying to speak. It was like a nightmare where I couldn't even scream. That single word broke the dam and the rest flooded out. I want to save him because my girlfriend miscarried and I'm scared I won't have kids. She never wanted any and it just happened. I didn't know how badly I wanted to raise a child until we lost ours. For months I kept thinking of the possible outcomes, of what it could have been, what never happened. My son or daughter died that day and my girlfriend nearly died too. Christ. I'm an awful person. I cared more about not having a child more than her life. So I moved thinking it would be better for her. When I saw Catfish, I just felt as if he was the child I never met. I'm such a piece of shit. I want to save him because I'm using him as a replacement. Tears came to my eyes and I kept my head down, unable to meet the creature's gaze. Admitting anything for the first time out loud hurt more than anything else in my life. Cutting an arm off would hurt less. It was something I could never truly forgive myself for. Regardless of how I saw Catfish, he didn't deserve to die because of my feelings. The creature let out another soft hiss, but this time it sounded as if she was laughing.
You humans never cease to amaze me. Fine. 1 second.
My head shot up, chest feeling light, hoping I'd heard her right. She shuffled around, digging through cupboards and teapots. Finally, she found what she was looking for. She walked over to hand me a vial of clear liquid.
Pour some of this over his wound. Make him drink the rest. Now hurry and get your disgusting alligator out from here. He's making the worst racket. I can't stand it.
The thank you was stuck in my throat. Instead, I raised an eyebrow at the alligator comment. She waved a hand in a shooing motion.
I'm a crocodile. Do not confuse me for those inept swamp creatures.
Even from all my stress, I almost laughed. Finally thanking her, I left the hut, frightened of what I would see outside. And what was outside was a sight I would never expect. The bayou was brighter, looking like the sun just rose. In front of the hut was a trail of destruction. Deep grooves in the ground where water started seeping in. Trees torn apart or smoldering. In the middle of the mess stood Gavin, looking perfectly fine.
I made a shortcut back, he announced.
I was starting to think this guy was the scariest thing in the bayou at that moment. I was thankful Catfish made friends with him. We wasted no time on small talk. Racing through the path Gavin opened up, found the boat much faster than expected. It was Agony sitting on the wooden seat as the boat floated along. Catfish was out there, still hurt, and I just wanted to get back to him as fast as possible. Finally, I saw him through the trees. I again got out of the boat to rush over to the body, vial in hand. My heart sank. Catfish appeared even worse than before. Wasting no time, I lifted the blanket to get a look at his wound for the first time. I nearly shut down at the gaping hole in his side. Steadying myself, I did what I was told. Pouring the liquid over the wound made Catfish flinch when he was still alive. Getting him to drink some was a bit of a task after the vial was empty, though I took him in my arms to wait. Gavin stayed on the boat, not even looking in our direction. He must feel guilty for Catfish getting hurt in the first place, and couldn't bring himself to go over to him. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. As I held the boy, his wound healed when I wasn't paying attention. He coughed a few times and sat up with his own strength. Looking around confused, his eyes landed on me alive but worn out. Unable to help himself, he crushed my ribs in a tight hug.
I was worried you weren't going to come back. Promise me you never do anything stupid like that again.
Catfish scolded. I hugged him back, so thankful he was alive. Going through any kind of nightmare in Bayou was well worth his life. His clothing torn, he looked just as bad as I did. Giving him a proper look over, I noticed something different about the boy. It was hard to place. His freckles were toned down slightly, and his mouth didn't appear as wide as before.
Pierre's the one who kept me alive. Has a terrible sense of humor. Looks like I was healed, but also turned into a human.
Catfish announced after looking himself over.
What? Why?
I asked, shocked.
Well, I lied to you before when I said I was just Catfish. I was something else. But because human would not understand my form, I went with the name of something I resembled. The organ that was stolen is something humans do not have. So if I'm human, I would no longer be dying due to it missing.
My mouth dropped open as he spoke. Made sense in a way. But was it really easy to change what he was instead of just healing him? Or maybe that woman did it for a laugh. What are you gonna do now? I mean, can you live here with all these dangerous monsters around? You think Gavin can watch over you? Catfish looked over at the man standing in the boat watching us before shaking his head.
I suppose this will wear off and I'll return to what I was before fully healed, but I don't know how long it can take. There's a chance I'll survive here until then, but it is a dangerous place. I guess I'll just have to make it work.
He nearly died, and yet Catfish didn't look concerned. He gave a shrug, not worried about his future. After all, we met because he was alright trying to eat from the garbage. He might be just fine being homeless, but I couldn't let that happen. You could stay with me, I told him. That startled him more than his near-death experience. Shaking his head, he was refusing because of embarrassed, rather than not wanting to take my offer.
I couldn't,
he started shyly. This is a selfish offer on my part, I told him. I spent the next few minutes explaining to him what made me move in the first place, and how I'd been using his company. I found the words easier to say a second time. I fully expected him to hate me or be disgusted over the truth of why I wanted him in my life. Instead, he gave a calm smile.
As long as you're happy and don't mind me taking up space, I'd like to stay with you until I return to what I was before.
It was a mutual beneficial agreement. Catfish got food and shelter, and I could treat him like the child I wanted. It may be twisted and selfish on my part, but he didn't appear to care in the slightest. Gavin brought along the boat so we could get it out of the bayou. Catfish was still exhausted as he fell asleep as the boat drifted along towards the dock. Staring at Gavin's back, I felt a little guilty, taking Catfish away. Is this alright? I asked the man.
As long as he's happy. And it is.
We didn't speak again until the boat bumped against the wooden dock. I lifted Catfish onto my back to carry him off the boat. Pausing, I looked at Gavin, who still stood in the boat, giving me a cold stare. You should go back home, "You don't belong in the bayou," I told him. His face twisted in a snarl at those words. For a moment I thought he would attack.
I told you, I'm a monster. I do belong here,
he hissed in a rage. "You kept the wedding ring," I replied in a soft tone. His face fell, then he turned it away, looked distraught over that fact. He couldn't hide the fact that he loved the man he married. The relationship may have started out as revenge, but it turned into something more than that. I wonder if his partner was hurting more now that he left. He walked back to the front of the boat and then started to drift away from the dock.
I'll think about it,
Gavin said finally before he got too far away. I watched until he was out of sight, before turning away to bring Catfish home. In the days after that event, I told my boss my nephew arrived. I was taking care of him for a while. Catfish would drop by the station and bring me lunch on days we didn't go out. Everyone loved him. I wanted to put him in school, but because he didn't have any kind of paperwork, that was impossible. Instead, we started on worksheets found online as homework. Neither of us know how long he would remain human for. Could be a year. Could be longer. Till he returned to the bayou, I would be glad to let him stay. A few months after taking in Catfish, I walked into work and noticed something different. A small change that made me smile. Troy Gavin's photo was taken down from the fallen officer wall. He might not have returned home, but at least now people knew he was still alive. It was a small step. I was proud of him.